Testing. Hi, it's Cheryl Gallant again, Conservative Member of Parliament for the anti-communist riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. Canada is known the world over for its natural beauty. Each year, millions of people from every country on earth visit our national or provincial parks. The communists who control China are known as international environmental criminals. Communist China is the largest polluter on the planet. Naturally, the Trudeau Liberals thought this Communist Party would be the perfect partner to lead the world in drafting an international agreement to protect the environment. The Trudeau Liberals and the Chinese Communist Party work closely with the United Nations to establish the Montreal Global Diversity Framework. While most Canadians were busy with last-minute Christmas preparations, envirocrats were meeting in Montreal. On December 22, 2022, the final agreement was reached. The Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework creates 23 targets to be completed in the next 7 years, but it's the first 3 which have Canadians worried. Target 3 has been the one to attract the most attention from the media. It calls for protecting 30% of Canada's ecologically pristine land and water by 2030. Target 2 calls for restoring 30% of degraded land to a natural state. What the envirocrats mean by degraded is land used by humans, such as for roads, farms, and homes. Target 1 calls for the end of all biodiversity loss by ensuring all land and water fall under the integrated biodiversity, inclusive spatial planning, and/or effective management processes. Translated from EnviroSpeak, this means all land and water in Canada must be covered by a conservation authority of some type. Trudeau's goal of protecting 30% of Canada's ecologically pristine land and water by 2030 is based on a slogan. 30 by 30 is his slogan for land conservation, electrical vehicle uptake, livestock methane release, carbon reductions, and nitrogen emissions. This has nothing to do with science, evidence, or ecology. It is only based on the simplicity of a slogan easy enough for Liberals to remember. Apparently, the last slogan was too hard for Liberals to remember. In 2015, Trudeau said his goal was to protect 17% of Canada's land and water by 2020. As of 2021, 13.9% of Canada is protected, which is only 3.4% more than in 2015. After 7 years, Trudeau could only reach half his own goal. Having learned no new lessons, he's now committing to conserve 4 times as much in the next 7 years. Should Canadians be concerned that Trudeau's environmental ambitions seem to grow the closer he works with the communists who control China? While much of the media attention has focused on Trudeau's promise to protect 30% of Canada's natural habitat by 2030, it's actually Target 2, which should alarm every landowner and taxpayer. The goal of Target 2 is to restore 30% of land currently being used by humans. The World Wildlife Foundation recently completed a study to identify areas most suitable for restoration. It identified Canada as having 50 million hectares of degraded land. While the World Wildlife Fund has a history of pushing propaganda, including doctoring photos of a polar bear, when this Trudeau-linked organization says it wants the federal government to seize 30% of land currently used by humans, believe them. To achieve a 30% restoration would require 15 million hectares, or the equivalent of 234 Toronto's worth of land. This isn't remote land or wilderness. The land being targeted is southern Ontario, southwestern Quebec, and BC's lower mainland. These are the most agriculturally productive areas in Canada, not to mention the most expensive land in Canada. Now, some may doubt such a vast expanse of privately held land would even become available for sale. However, combined with Trudeau's plan to reduce emissions from fertilizer, the plan becomes clear. The Liberals will make farming in Ontario so uneconomical and bankrupt so many families, leaving the government free to snap up land at fire sale prices. While farmers will feel particularly targeted by Trudeau's plans, every single landowner in Canada, whether rural, suburban, or urban, is going to be impacted by Target 1 of the Liberal Communist plan. While Target 3 seeks to protect current wilderness and Target 2 seeks to restore farms and rural homes to wilderness, Target 1 seeks to regulate all land through conservation authority type regulations. Canadians currently living under conservation authorities can testify to the bureaucratic nightmares which come when making minor alterations to the property they own. This model will be replicated across the country. Every Canadian will be effectively living under the regulatory power of a new class of environmental bureaucrats. The Supreme Leader will always be watching. Yesterday, I rose in the House of Commons to honor the life of Tom Stevenson. Thomas Campbell Soup Stevenson was born December 8, 1986. Soup was one of the many nicknames for Tom that marked one's acceptance into the special camaraderie that comes with the demanding physical life of a logger. Tom was one of those characters that have a famous legacy in the Upper Ottawa Valley, his own unique vision of a Big Joe Mufferaw. Tom grew up during the time the logging industry was the principal activity in the Ottawa Valley. A traditionalist woodsman, Tom was involved in the forestry program at Algonquin College campus in Pembroke. Tom was a unique professor. Raised during a time when slouches didn't last long, he challenged his students to do better. His infectious enthusiasm launched many careers in the working forest. I met Tom when he was overseeing the construction of a replica of a squared timber raft, the kind that were used to float logs down the Ottawa River to market. It was a labor-intensive job, all done with old-fashioned hand tools from the day. In his later years, Tom is remembered for his collection of forestry memorabilia that he'd put on display and the many stories that he'd tell with the Ottawa Valley lumber trade. Tom passed earlier this year in Pembroke in his 86th year, and may he rest in peace. Last month, I asked if the Liberals would freeze their inflation-fueling plan to hike the carbon tax. The parliamentary secretary responded by talking about dentistry. Well, as the wife of a dentist, I can say with some certainty that our teeth are not causing climate change. Now, even these Liberals are claiming carbon is not the real culprit. According to this social alliance, the real victim was capitalism all along, and not just capitalism. Apparently, climate change is also caused by individual liberty and too much democracy. In the typical Liberal fashion, the government hired far-left consultants to hold focus groups with far-left public workers to discuss climate change. If there were any small L Liberals left in that party, they'd have denounced this report as ridiculous and apologized to taxpayers for wasting our money. Now, they might protest that this report they published doesn't reflect their views, but that's hard to square with the Prime Minister's publicly stated views about admiring authoritarian China. Every Canadian was given a full display of the Prime Minister's contempt for democracy when he assaulted two members on the House of the floor of the old chamber. That time, the Prime Minister was impatient with the NDP delaying the whips. The Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act when he grew impatient with people protesting his government. Now that this socialist coalition has deluded itself into believing that climate change is actually an existential threat requiring emergency actions, what extraordinary actions are they willing to take? According to these public health experts, the plan is clear. They would like to replace our liberal democracy with a socialist democracy. These self-anointed experts would guide society to a green utopia. Some liberals might hear that and roll their eyes, and that's because they haven't read the report. Or worse, they share the Prime Minister's ridiculous, cliched thinking. The Prime Minister said he admired the communists' ability to implement environmental policies on a whim. What the Prime Minister forgets, or what he never bothered to learn, is the environmental track record of socialist and authoritarian nations. The collapse of the Soviet Union resulted in a massive reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. It was Russia's demand to maintain Soviet-sized quota which killed any chance of an effective international agreement in the 1990s. Yet this Prime Minister looks at communists building a new coal plant every month and decides Canada needs more of that. I know why the government would rather talk about dentists than carbon taxes. We got the government's answer to my question on April 1st. The carbon tax went up and will keep going up until this costly coalition is defeated. The Liberal NDP Socialist Alliance is spreading misinformation and disinformation. They claim Canadians receive more in climate bribes than they pay in carbon taxes. False. They claim a higher carbon tax will stop hurricanes. False. They claim the carbon tax is market-based. False. They claim billions in subsidies is good for the economy. False. They claim they'll cut carbon dioxide emissions by 30% by 2030. They claim they cut nitrogen, or will cut nitrogen 30% by 2030. They claim they'll protect 30% of land by 2030. They claim 30% of cars must be EVs by 2030. This socialist coalition doesn't have policies. It has slogans. The latest Liberal talking point is to claim Conservatives have no plans. More disinformation. If they really believe that, they'd call an election and let Canadians decide which team has the best plan for a brighter future. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant.